Hi, I'm Ashley, and 1 year ago, I had a breast reduction. Here's my road to reduction. Hi, and thanks for joining me on episode 4, Medical PTSD. You'll notice this episode doesn't have a catchy title. It's not joking or puns. It's just telling it what it is. So in the last episode, we covered therapy and why I needed it and how it started out. And today we're continuing that journey with another hard-hitting topic. So it may get a little emotional again, just be forewarned. So therapy started with going over my life history, and it was talking about my family and my education, and since we were there about surgery, my medical history. And my medical history is quite diverse, I guess is a good word. I am medically needy, I think is just the best way to phrase it. I have a heart condition I was born with called pulmonic stenosis, which just means my pulmonary valve did not form correctly. Currently in my life, it's not a major factor. It's actually working 99% correctly, so it has very little impact on my adult life right now, but in my future it may. And as a kid, pulmonic stenosis was very intensive, according to the American Heart Association. There was a lot of prep and a lot of things that had to be considered with it. It's since been downgraded. So, and that's why I say in my adult life it doesn't have a whole lot of impact right now. But I also have IBS, I have asthma, I have a gluten sensitivity, which may be headed towards an intolerance, so I have a lot going on health-wise. I'm definitely not the most healthy person to begin with. So here I am getting ready for this surgery when I have all of this background. So my therapist started digging into that background with me, and she just wanted to know what was going on. And I mentioned offhandedly that I had white coat syndrome, which is an elevated blood pressure whenever you go into the doctor's office, but you get normal numbers at home. And so she asked me how we discovered that, and that led into a really interesting discussion. And that discussion ended up with me being diagnosed with medical PTSD. So for those of you unaware, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it really is anxiety and flashbacks that are caused by stimulus related to a traumatic event. And it can be debilitating for people. You commonly hear about it with soldiers or people who have been through intense traumas. It's not a topic that should be taken lightly. It is a very debilitating, very challenging mental condition that a lot of people face. So to hear me say that I have medical PTSD, I'm not making light of PTSD. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anyone who has it because of a terrible traumatic war event or domestic event or whatever event. I'm not using this term by choice. I'm using this by diagnosis. I am actually diagnosed with medical PTSD, and prior to therapy didn't realize that could be a thing. So I just want to point out that as we go through this episode, I am not trying to make light of anything. I am not trying to diminish this disorder or anyone else's experience with it. I'm just sharing my experience with it. So to explain how I got this diagnosis, because I really feel like I want to, and maybe that will help put everything else in light. When I was 20, I was getting ready to head back to college at the end of the summer, and I was outside beating off a rug to get all the dirt out of it, and didn't realize that on the trailer I had chosen to do this on was a wasp's nest, and so the wasp came storming out of their nest to attack the intruder they viewed me as, and I got stung a couple times. No big deal. It was the first time I'd been stung in my life, and, I went in and I washed it out, and I put on, antibacterial ointment and called it a day. Like, it sucked. It was not the best pain-wise, but it wasn't a major event. It was like, oh, okay, I've been stung by a bee, whatever. So about a week later, those sting sites swelled up and turned bright red and were hot. And so I called the doctor and they were like, you need to get in immediately. So I went after work one day. I had a summer internship. I went from the internship to the doctor's office and they prescribed me a steroid. They told me to watch out for blood poisoning and I thought everything was fine and dandy. So I went and got that filled, went on with my life. 2 days later, the doctor's office calls me back and says they need me to come in for an immediate appointment. And when I ask why, they won't tell me why. So already I'm a little nervous about this. Like, why do I need to come in? What is this about the bee stings? And I couldn't get any answers from the receptionist. She was just like, they'll tell you when you come in. So we schedule an appointment within a day, and I go back, having to miss my internship again. And they take my blood pressure, and then I'm waiting for the doctor, and it's just waiting. And as we're waiting, I'm getting more nervous because what is going on here? The nurse didn't have answers for me. And so the doctor comes in and says that my blood pressure was really high the previous visit, the one I went in for the steroids because I was looking out for blood poisoning, and that it was really high when I came in this time, and they're gonna wait and take it a little bit later. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So I sat there for about 10 minutes or so, and they came back and they took it, and it was not lower, it was higher. Can't imagine why. And so the doctor looks at it, and she's like, okay, we're gonna give it one more try, but I really think you need to go home and call your cardiologist, because I really think that your heart condition, your pulmonic stenosis, is degrading rapidly, and that's the cause for this. And then proceeds to take my blood pressure again as I start sobbing. Like, she tells me my heart is failing, I'm 20 years old, I start sobbing hysterically because this was not at all what I was expecting. And she takes my blood pressure again and then chides me because it's higher than the last two. I don't know, maybe the fact that I'm sobbing hysterically because I now think I'm dying, because you've basically told a 20-year-old she's dying, is a reason for it to be higher, but not a medical professional, so who knows? So, and just a disclaimer, you're going to hear me use sarcasm and humor to get through a lot of these traumatic experiences. That is one way I deal with stress and anxiety and trauma, is to make light of it when it really is a serious matter, and that's what I do, and I'm just going to own it. So I drive home crying the whole way, because here I am, 20 and told my heart is failing, which the last time I visited the cardiologist was not the case, so clearly stuff has gone badly in the last couple years, because I don't have to see her every year. And so I don't even remember calling her, truthfully. I don't know if I did it. I don't know if my mother did it. It's very possible that was. I just know I was a mess. I was a mess. Complete and utter mess. But someone called and set up an appointment with my cardiologist, who is an amazing woman, but because she is so amazing, she is constantly busy, and I couldn't get an appointment for a month and a half. That felt like forever. When you have had a doctor call you in, tell you your blood pressure is sky high, because your heart is failing, you need to see your cardiologist now, and then to be told you have to wait a month and a half, was terrifying. That month and a half is pretty much a fog for me. In that month and a half, I went back to college. I contemplated my own mortality, not gonna lie. I had a really good conversation. I was an RA in college. I had a really good conversation with some coworkers in the week leading up to my appointment, because I was so out of sorts that they noticed, even though they'd only been working with me for a couple months. So we had a fantastic conversation in which I told them that if it was true and my heart was failing at the age of 20, I would not be going after surgery. I would not do that. Quality of life was more important to me than quantity of life. I had watched my paternal grandfather go through multiple heart surgeries and heart attacks growing up, and I didn't want to be there. I struggled dealing with that, and I didn't want anyone to have to deal with that with me. And so I told them that if I went in and that was the truth and surgery was needed, I was going to literally drop out of college the next day and find a way to travel the world and do my bucket list, because at the age of 20, if my heart is failing and we need to start surgery already, all I saw was a lifetime of surgery after surgery. Whether that was the case or not, I don't know. I wasn't even willing to listen to the doctor at that point about what surgery would mean and look like. And granted, this is like 12 years out of my grandfather starting his, or not really starting, but me starting to be aware of his surgeries and all of that before he passed. And surgeries come a long way. Technology, healthcare come a long way. But I wasn't willing to do that battle at that point in my life. So I had a great conversation with them about that. And, you know, contemplating your own mortality at the age of 20 was just astounding. It was scary. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It was not where I wanted to be. So I went in to the cardiologist appointment and had my mother come with me because I knew I needed some support. And I love my cardiologist so much. She is this amazing woman. She's tinier than I am, and I'm not terribly tall at 5'4", but she's smaller than I am, and she's just a spitfire. So she came into the room and was like, okay, what's going on? Because I wasn't supposed to see you for 3 more years. And because we had a 5-year span going at the time. And so I explained what had happened, tearfully, because I was just a bundle of anxiety. The blood pressure that the nurse had took when I got there was sky high. Absolutely sky high. Because I thought I was going in to hear about my own mortality and dying, and, like, of course it was sky high. And so she's like, okay, we're not even going to put those first numbers in the computer. And I watched her delete them. And she had me lay down on the table and got up to do an echocardiogram to look at my heart. And she was so funny. She ended up, like, mounting me on the table to get every single angle. And when she's done, she looked at me and said, they don't know what they're talking about. And she said, your heart is doing the same, if not better, as last time I saw you. It's working 99% correctly. In fact, you know, it would be a struggle to find it if we didn't know this existed. And that was just so relieving. That was just so relieving. I cried again. There were a lot of tears through these appointments, and this time it was tears of joy. And so she said, okay, I just saw you. We're counting this as your next visit. I don't want to see you for 7 years. So to go from thinking my heart is failing and I'm dying at the age of 20 to you're perfectly fine, I don't want to see you for 7 years, was just night and day. There was such a relief, and there was such just joy, and I went back to college, and life has been good. But since then, I've had that white coat syndrome. So she's the one who said, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if your blood pressure is going to be elevated with the doctor for the next couple of years. That was her prediction. Well, it's been way more than a couple of years. I am now 30, and for the last 10 years, I have had white coat syndrome. And I just assumed it was white coat syndrome until the therapist and I got talking. And she said, white coat syndrome is what's manifesting as your PTSD in the doctor's office. Your PTSD is driving those numbers up because of prior experiences. We're not done yet on what caused this. This is just the beginning. And so I was like, okay, that makes sense. But there's a lot more to it than that. So instead of going in depth about other experiences, let's just say in my early to mid-20s, I had multiple run-ins with multiple professionals in doctors' offices, nurses, PAs, doctors themselves, all who would not listen to me, all who told me I was wrong for listening to my body, all who discounted me. I switched doctor's offices immediately after the heart scare because I couldn't trust them, and I refused to go to them again. So after multiple things of this happening back to back, I started to not take such good care of myself doctor-wise. I'll admit, to the point, I'm still doing it. I'm still well aware of it. I just saw a dentist this year because in my mind, the PTSD triggers with them as well. So I hadn't seen a dentist in 5 years until this summer. I just have high anxiety when it comes to calling about a doctor's appointment, reaching out to a doctor's office with a question, finding a new doctor when I moved to a different area in my mid-20s. I waited on that for like a year and a half because I didn't want to face it. And so as I was starting to share these feelings and these reactions, because we continued on past the age of 20 with my therapist, and she's like, yeah, you have PTSD. And I was like, no, what? I haven't done anything to have PTSD. And she was like, with the amount of medical experiences and how terribly most of them have gone, you have medical PTSD. There's no question about it. End of story. And so I started digging into what PTSD was. I mean, she gave me an overview, but I started digging more because I felt like I'm an imposter with this diagnosis. I mean, at one point it was relieving to be like, this is not just me hating doctors. Like, there's reasons behind it that I'd never delved into myself. But at the same time, it was also like, I haven't been to war, I can't have PTSD. Like, that's really what my mindset was, which is not true at all. Anyone can have PTSD. Domestic abuse survivors typically have PTSD. Children who have to suffer through terrible situations in their home life will have PTSD. Like, it's really, really common. People don't realize how common it is. And I'm just pointing this out, like, anyone can have PTSD. You don't have to, go to war to have it. And so I was kind of taking it in slowly when my admission paperwork came from the plastic surgeon's office. And it was your typical paperwork. It wasn't anything special. Again, it was gathering medical history, what is going on with your body, who is your medical contacts if something should go wrong. The typical admission paperwork that every doctor's office makes you fill out. And I couldn't fill it out. I got the paperwork the day after I had been to a therapy appointment, in fact, and I sat down to do it, and 5 minutes in, my body had to move. I was anxious and tight and just couldn't deal. I couldn't get past filling out, like, my name and my address and phone number. It was terrible. So I got up and I did something, and I came back and I was like, okay, I need to finish this. And 5 minutes later, I was like, oh, I should clean the dishes. I hate the dishes with a fiery passion. I hate dishes. They are the bane of my existence. But they were perfect in that moment because they were not this paperwork. It took me a day and a half to fill out 3 pages of medical history. A day and a half. Because every time I sat down to do it, I got so anxious and nervous and panicked. Like, to the point where I was almost at panic attacks. Because it was triggering this PTSD. And it was like a trigger. As soon as I looked at that paperwork, I started getting anxious. It was a piece of paper, and here I was about to have a panic attack about filling out that, oh, I have a heart condition when I know I have a heart condition. It was just so overwhelming to me. So I brought the paperwork to my next therapy appointment, and that's when, we were really digging into the medical history, so it was just perfect timing. And she's like, this is your medical PTSD at work. That is why you're struggling. Because this is causing flashbacks for you. This is causing that anxiety, those stress triggers that are firing in your brain and making you panic. Because your default response to a doctor is panic. She's not wrong. It's still panic. PTSD is not something that once you diagnose it, you can take a magical drug and it goes away. That's not how it works at all. So sitting here with my medical PTSD, talking about medical stuff in this podcast is sometimes very triggering as well. We'll get into the weeks leading up to surgery and how the fallout of my medical PTSD almost prevented that later on, because that's a great story. But I struggled. Here I am struggling emotionally about the surgery. Here I am struggling body image-wise about the surgery, and then it just felt like another thing. Like, here's medical PTSD. You are struggling because this is a surgery. Plain and simple. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. It's like, you're gonna struggle because this is doctor-related, and that's a trigger for you. That is a huge stress anxiety trigger in your brain, and it's been made that way by your prior experiences with terrible doctors, or doctors who were too busy to listen, or whatever. I mean, I shouldn't judge, but I do. I acknowledge that. So instead, we had to focus on how can we get you out of panic mode. And her first step was to teach me to sit with the anxiety, which is as miserable as it sounds. Oh my gosh, was it terrible. It was wonderful at the end, but it was terrible at the beginning. So sitting with your anxiety was literally that. So she told me, like, next time I had paperwork, next time I thought about the surgery, next time I could feel that anxiety, to sit with it for 1 minute. And you're like, okay, you can do anything for a minute. A minute's really quick. Bam, a minute's gone. Like, you can do anything for a minute. Nope, I couldn't. I couldn't sit with the anxiety for a full minute, because she had me timing myself. I could make it like 30 seconds on a good day at first. 30 seconds of that panicked feeling before I had to move and do something. So we worked on sitting with the anxiety. Just holding on to it and acknowledging its existence for a minute. And then when I got to 1 minute, it was 2 minutes. And then it was a few minutes. And then it was as long as you can. As long as I can only became like 5 minutes. I'm not gonna lie. It's not like I sat there being anxious for an hour at a time. It was 5 minutes of, this is a real emotion. This is an emotion I'm allowed to have. This is an emotion my body is having because of whatever the root cause is. And it was my job to find the root cause. And eventually, sitting with the anxiety turns into, you sit with it, you find the root cause, you figure out how to dismantle that cause or change that cause or impact it. And what I mean by that is, so, for example, those thought spirals, like the ones leading up to surgery, I'm gonna die on the table. It was sitting with the anxiety of that for a few minutes, figuring out, oh, the cause is this thought circle of I'm gonna die on the table. The solution is less than 0.5% of people die during this surgery. The solution is, oh, but they have a plan in case something goes wrong, you're near a major hospital that they're connected to, and they have this emergency equipment, and the staff is trained in this, and it was talking you through the logic of it, because I was so wrapped up in the anxiety, and so wrapped up in the emotions, I couldn't see logic. And I tend to think of myself as a logical person. This is just what PTSD does to your brain. It removes all logic. It removes executive functioning. It removes the ability to process, and it feeds on the anxiety. Again, those thought spirals. You get more and more anxious, and then bam, panic attack. And I did have several in this process. I had probably more than I remember, because truthfully I would rather care not to. So that was the first step. But then there was also the self-care, like I talked about in the last episode, and figuring out things to, once I've gotten over this hump of, okay, I accept that I'm anxious, I've acknowledged why I shouldn't, how do I get myself out of this headspace? That was the self-care, the taking hot baths, the drinking tea, the finding a good book, talking to a friend, whatever it takes. And so after that, it just became a matter of processing. Process and process and process. And you spend time in this space. And that's just what we were working on for so long. And so the closer we got to surgery, the more that was happening and the more that wasn't helping. I'll be very frank about that. I did not feel like this was targeting the PTSD the way I needed it to be. And so then we started working on breathing exercises for when I was too anxious to be able to process and find the root cause of why. And then we worked on meditation, so getting my headspace in order to be able to be strong enough to deal with this. And we worked on acknowledgement. We worked on the acknowledgement that PTSD is a major part of my life, especially medically. Exclusively medically, really. And it will always be a part of my life, and I will just have to learn coping skills that help me get past it. And then I will have to put those coping skills into use. It's great knowing them, but if you don't use them, it's not going to help you. And so it was a lot of breaking the pieces down It was a lot of accepting that this is like a fight or flight response, and it's a visceral response that my body has in regard to a certain topic, the medical field, that it will continuously have even if I try to train myself. I mean, like the dentist that I went to this summer, huge anxiety about that. I had huge anxiety about that and had to use those coping skills again. So this medical PTSD talk needed to happen because it's going to frame so much of the rest of this journey. This medical PTSD is going to be an underlying theme of how I handled things, how things look to my perspective in my brain, and I will do my best to consciously point out when my PTSD is just being ridiculous about my viewpoint of something regarding surgery. But I do want you to know that moving forward through all of this, that's sitting behind my words and my thoughts and my emotions. That there is a part of my brain that's just on high alert about this whole topic, and it definitely made it so I didn't handle everything as smoothly as it could have been. But I'm sure I'm not the only one who is going through that, and that's the whole point of this. The whole point of this podcast is for someone else to get help, whether it's about a small topic like the PTSD part or the whole journey of breast reduction. I'm just here to make sure that you are getting support and you are getting help and you're feeling like you're not alone and you're being listened to and you have someone on this journey with you. Because I've been there, I've felt it, it's intense. And if you're feeling stressed out, that's appropriate. And if you're calm, I'm totally jealous, but that's also appropriate. Everyone is going to handle this differently, and I'm just trying to get my story and my voice out there because we need to talk about things like this medical PTSD and breast reduction and necessary surgeries for health. These are all such important topics. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to what feels like me rambling today about a very major topic, and I just hope that you'll take a moment to share this with someone who may need it, whether it's this one topic or this whole journey, and that you'll get the word out. And I want to remind you that you can reach out to me with questions, comments, feedback, concerns, just for someone to listen at roadtoreductionpodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at roadtoreduction. I have a WordPress blog, which is roadtoreductionpodcast.wordpress.com. You can send me messages or comments on Soundcloud or Podbean or YouTube. I'm Road to Reduction on all of those. So if you need me or just want to make contact with me, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to hear other people's stories. I'd love to hear how other people felt going into this surgery. It would be really interesting to compare someone's journey who doesn't have medical PTSD to mine. So don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you for listening. So once again, I'm Ashley. 1 year ago, I had a breast reduction, and thanks for joining me on my road to reduction. Music is Like Music CDK Mix by CDK, copyright 2013. It's licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license.